The CEO who saved me from the streets was far more dangerous than I thought. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. Hunger was not a passive ache. It was a living, breathing parasite that gnawed at the lining of Christine Perry's stomach with the persistence of a rat chewing through drywall. She pressed her back against the damp brick of the alleyway, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the fissures of the city that had chewed her up and spat her out 3 weeks ago. The rain had started an hour ago, a freezing, miserable drizzle that turned the grime on the cobblestones into a slick, black paste. It soaked through the thin layers of her oversized denim jacket, the only barrier between her and the biting wind that whipped off the harbor. She checked the dumpster to her left again, though she knew it was empty. The high-end supper club on the other side of the brick wall usually threw out bread or bruised fruit around midnight, but tonight the metal container was barren. Christine pulled her knees to her chest, her breath plumbing in the frigid air like cigarette smoke. Her gray eyes, once bright and full of the naivety of a girl who thought the world was fair, scanned the alley entrance. Survival on the streets was 90% observation and 10% luck. Tonight, her luck was running thin. Heavy footsteps echoed against the wet pavement, accompanied by the low, raucous laughter of men who had indulged in too much cheap liquor. Christine froze, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She shifted, trying to merge with the shadows behind a stack of wooden pallets, but the movement was a mistake. A boot scraped against gravel. 3 silhouettes blocked the alley entrance, backlit by the harsh orange glow of the street lamp. They were large, jagged shapes in the gloom. "Well, look at what we have here," one of them sneered, his voice thick with slurry aggression. He stepped forward, the light catching the gold chain around his thick neck. "Looks like a little rat got lost." Christine stood up slowly. Running was pointless, the alley was a dead end, she had to be sharp, she had to be scary. She pulled a jagged shard of glass she kept in her pocket, gripping it until the edge bit into her palm. The pain was grounding. "Back off," she warned, though her voice rasped, dry from dehydration. "I have nothing you want." The leader laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "We are not looking for money, sweetheart." They advanced. Christine backed away until her spine hit the cold steel of the dumpster. She raised the glass, her hand trembling not from fear, but from the bone-deep cold that had settled into her marrow. She calculated the distance. If she slashed the first one, the other 2 would be on her before she could draw a breath. It was a losing equation. The rear door of the supper club burst open, spilling a rectangle of warm, golden light onto the wet asphalt. The sudden illumination blinded the 3 men, causing them to flinch and shield their eyes. Silhouetted in the doorway stood a man. He was tall, eclipsing the light, his shoulders broad and set with the rigidity of a statue. He wore a suit that probably cost more than the building Christine had grown up in, black, tailored to perfection, swallowing the light rather than reflecting it. He stepped out into the rain without hesitation, ignoring the water that immediately began to darken the shoulders of his jacket. He did not look at the thugs, he looked directly at Christine. His face was a mask of predatory calm, angles sharp enough to cut. Jet black hair was swept back from a forehead that showed no lines of worry, only the intense concentration of a man who calculated probabilities for sport. His eyes were dark, abyssal pools that seemed to absorb everything in the alleyway. "Get lost," the leader of the thugs barked, trying to regain his bravado, though he took a half-step back. "This does not concern you, rich boy." The man in the suit finally shifted his gaze. He did not blink. He did not posture. He simply looked at the thug with the disinterest one might show a cockroach before crushing it. 2 more men appeared from the doorway behind him, massive, silent figures with earpieces and hands resting casually inside their jackets. They did not look like bouncers, they moved with the disciplined lethality of soldiers. The man in the suit spoke, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the damp air, smooth and devastatingly commanded. "You are loitering on private property. You have 5 seconds to vacate the premises before my associates remove you. Permanently." The threat was not shouted. It was stated as a simple fact, inevitable as the tide. The thug looked at the man, then at the silent guards behind him, and the color drained from his face. The alcohol-induced courage evaporated instantly. Without a word, the three men turned and scrambled out of the alley, their footsteps splashing loudly as they fled into the night. Christine did not lower the glass shard. She pressed her back harder against the dumpster, her chest heaving. The danger had shifted, not vanished. The man in the suit turned his attention back to her. He took a step forward, his expensive leather shoes ignoring the puddles. "Put the glass down," he said softly. Christine shook her head, her jaw set. "Stay back." He stopped, respecting the boundary, though she suspected he could bridge the distance and disarm her before she even flinched. He studied her, his gaze traveling from her mud-splattered boots to the tangled mess of her dark hair, finally resting on her face. He didn't look at her with pity, which she would have despised. He looked at her with curiosity. "You are freezing," he noted. "I am fine," she lied, her teeth chattering so hard the words fractured. He reached into his jacket. Christine flinched, raising the glass higher, but he only withdrew a silver cigarette case. He didn't open it, he just turned it over in his long fingers. "My name is Adrian Cross," he said. "I own this building. I own the club. I own the alley you are standing in." Christine stared at him. Adrian Cross. The name was vaguely familiar, a headline on a discarded newspaper she had used as a blanket a week ago. Something about mergers, acquisitions, and a ruthless takeover of the city's shipping logistics. "Good for you," she muttered. "I will move, just give me a minute." "You have nowhere to go," Adrian countered. His voice lacked judgment, it was purely analytical. "The shelters are full by 6 in the evening. The subway grates are patrolled by police. You are exhausted, malnourished, and judging by the way you are holding that glass, you are terrified but unwilling to show it." "I am not terrified," she snapped, though the adrenaline was beginning to crash, leaving her lightheaded. "No," he conceded, tilting his head slightly. "You are desperate. There is a difference." He signaled to one of the guards, who immediately stepped forward with a large black umbrella, holding it over Adrian's head. Adrian extended his hand, not to take the glass, but to offer an invitation. "I have a proposition for you," he said. Christine laughed, a brittle, sharp sound. "I know what kind of propositions men like you have for girls like me. Go to hell." Adrian's expression did not change, but a flicker of something, perhaps respect, darkened his eyes. "I am not looking for a whore. I can buy companionship if I require it, and I assure you, I require much higher standards of hygiene." The insult stung, but it was honest. Christine lowered the glass an inch. "Then what do you want?" "I need someone who does not exist," he said cryptically. "Someone who can be invisible. You seem to have mastered the art." Christine hesitated. The cold was becoming painful now, a physical weight dragging her down. She looked at his hand, clean, manicured, strong. Then she looked at the dark alley behind her. "One night," Adrian said, sensing her wavering resolve, "a warm meal, a shower, a bed with a lock on the door. If you want to leave in the morning, the door will be open." "Why?" she whispered. "Because I detest wasted potential," he replied smoothly. "And watching you freeze to death on my property would be bad for business." It was a lie, or at least a partial truth, but Christine was too cold to parse the nuance. She dropped the shard of glass. It clattered onto the wet pavement. "If you touch me," she said, her voice trembling, "I will kill you. I do not care who you are." Adrian Cross actually smiled then. It was not a warm smile. It was a razor-thin curve of his lips that promised violence as much as it promised safety. "I would expect nothing less." The ride to the penthouse was a blur of sensory overload. The car was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, the interior smelling of rich mahogany and leather. The warmth was instant, wrapping around Christine like a heavy blanket. She sat as far away from Adrian as possible, pressing herself against the door, terrified of staining the pristine cream upholstery with the filth of the streets. Adrian ignored her for the duration of the drive. He was on his phone, typing rapid messages, his face illuminated by the pale blue light of the screen. He spoke once to the driver, a massive man named Marcus who had eyes like flint, giving a destination that sounded more like a fortress than a home: the Spire. When the car pulled into the underground garage, it bypassed the resident parking and went straight to a private elevator bank guarded by 2 more men in suits. They nodded at Adrian as he stepped out, their eyes sliding over Christine with professional indifference. They didn't see a person, they saw a package Adrian was transporting. The elevator ride was silent and swift, the numbers climbing higher and higher until her ears popped. When the doors slid open, Christine gasped. She had expected an apartment. What she stepped into was a palace in the sky. The penthouse was a cavernous expanse of glass and dark stone. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a glittering sea of electric diamonds that seemed miles below them. The furniture was sparse but clearly Italian and obscenely expensive: low-profile sofas, abstract sculptures, a fireplace that spanned half a wall. It was beautiful, sterile, and cold. Adrian walked in as if he owned the air inside the room. He tossed his keys into a crystal bowl and turned to face her. Under the bright lights of the penthouse, he looked even more imposing. He was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and lean, radiating a coiled power that made the hair on the back of Christine's neck stand up. "Marcus will show you to the guest wing," Adrian said, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "There is clothing in the closet. It might be large, but it is clean. There is food in the kitchen. Eat as much as you want." Christine stood rooted to the spot near the elevator, clutching her dirty jacket. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice sounding small in the vast room. Adrian paused. He walked over to a wet bar and poured a small amount of amber liquid into a tumbler. He took a sip, his eyes locking onto hers over the rim of the glass. "Let us just say, I am investing in a chaotic variable," he said. He turned his back on her, dismissing her as effectively as if he had snapped his fingers. Christine followed Marcus down a long hallway lined with modern art that looked like violent slashes of black paint on white canvas. He opened a door at the end of the hall, revealing a bedroom larger than the entire squat she had shared with 6 other people a month ago. "Lock works from the inside," Marcus rumbled, his voice like gravel. "Boss says do not leave the room until morning. The motion sensors in the hall are armed at night. You trigger them, security will be up here in 30 seconds with guns drawn. Understand?" "I understand," Christine whispered. Marcus nodded once and closed the door. She heard the heavy click of the latch. Christine rushed to the door and threw the deadbolt. Only then did she allow her knees to buckle. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her hands. She was safe. For tonight, she was safe. She stripped off her filthy clothes, leaving them in a pile by the door, and walked into the bathroom. It was entirely marble. The shower had more nozzles than she knew what to do with. She turned the water on as hot as she could stand it and stepped in, scrubbing her skin until it was raw and pink, watching the gray water swirl down the drain. She washed away the alley, the fear, the smell of garbage and desperation. When she finally stepped out, wrapped in a plush white robe she found hanging on a heated rack, she felt human again. She found a sandwich in a mini fridge near the bed, roast beef and arugula, and devoured it in 3 bites. She crawled into the massive bed, the sheets feeling like silk against her skin. But sleep did not come easily. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the high-rise. Adrian Cross had saved her. But as she replayed the encounter in the alley, the way the thugs had fled at the mere sight of him, the way his guards moved like trained killers, the cold emptiness of his eyes, she realized something that chilled her more than the rain ever had. Adrian Cross was not a benevolent savior. He was a shark who had just invited a minnow into his tank. She had traded the unpredictable violence of the streets for a calculated, controlled danger. And she had no idea what the price of admission was going to be. The next morning, the sun assaulted the room through the glass walls. Christine woke up disoriented, her heart racing for a split second before she remembered where she was: the Spire. She found a simple gray t-shirt and sweatpants in the closet, likely belonging to Adrian given the length, and rolled up the cuffs. She unlocked the door cautiously. The hallway was quiet. She followed the smell of coffee. It led her back to the main living area. Adrian was there, sitting at a long glass dining table. He was already dressed in another immaculate suit, this one charcoal gray. He was reading a document on a tablet, a cup of black coffee steaming near his hand. He didn't look up as she entered. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in months," Christine admitted, hovering by the archway. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair opposite him without lifting his eyes. She sat. A plate of eggs and toast had been set at the place. She ate slowly, trying to mind her manners, though her stomach demanded she shovel the food in. So, Adrian said, finally setting the tablet down. He interlaced his fingers and leaned forward. Now that you are clean and fed, we can discuss the terms of your employment. Employment? Christine asked, pausing with toast halfway to her mouth. I thought this was a charity case. I do not do charity, Adrian said coldly. Charity is a tax write-off. This is a transaction. What can I possibly offer you? I have nothing. You have anonymity, he repeated, and you have a survival instinct that I find useful. I need a housekeeper. Christine blinked. You live in a $50 million penthouse and you need a housekeeper. You can hire an army of maids. I had an army of maids, Adrian corrected. I fired them. They talk too much. They see things they shouldn't, and then they sell those stories to tabloids or, worse, my competitors. And you think I won't. I think you are smart enough to know that if you talk, you end up back in the alley. Or worse. His eyes held hers, and the threat was palpable. It wasn't a scream, it was a whisper. I need someone to maintain this residence, he continued. Stock the fridge, handle the laundry, ensure the space is presentable. In exchange, you get room, board, and a small stipend. But the rules are absolute. Rules? 1, he said, holding up a finger. You never enter my office. 2, you never ask about my visitors or my business. 3, you never leave the building without Marcus escorting you. That sounds like prison, Christine said, her chin lifting defiantly. It is a fortress, Adrian corrected. There is a difference. He stood up, towering over the table. He checked his watch, a platinum timepiece that caught the morning light. I have meetings until 6. Marcus is downstairs. If you decide to leave, tell him, and he will drive you back to the alley where we met. If you decide to stay, have the kitchen organized by the time I return. He walked toward the private elevator. Wait, Christine called out. Adrian paused, his hand on the call button. He looked back over his shoulder. Why me, she asked. Really, why me? Adrian looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because, Christine, he said, his voice dropping an octave. When those men cornered you, you didn't scream for help. You picked up a piece of glass. You were ready to bleed to survive. The elevator doors slid open. I can work with that. The doors closed, leaving Christine alone in the silence of the penthouse, surrounded by glass and sky, wondering if she had just made a deal with the devil himself. The silence of the spire was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a submarine deep beneath the ocean. 2 weeks had passed since Adrian Cross had plucked Christine Perry from the rain-slicked alleyway, and in that time, she had learned that safety was a relative term. She was safe from the hunger that had hollowed out her cheeks, safe from the freezing winds that whipped off the harbor, and safe from the predators who roamed the streets looking for easy targets. But she had simply traded one jungle for another, one where the predators wore Italian silk, and the cages were made of reinforced glass and steel. Christine moved through the penthouse with the quiet efficiency of a ghost. She had fallen into a rhythm, a routine that kept her hands busy and her mind from fracturing under the weight of her strange new reality. She scrubbed surfaces that were already spotless, organized a pantry that looked like a magazine spread, and ensured that Adrian's life ran with the precision of the Swiss watch he wore on his wrist. But as she worked, she watched. The street rat in her had not vanished. It had merely gone dormant, observing every exit, every routine, every shift in the atmosphere. She realized quickly that the staff Adrian employed were not domestic workers. Marcus, the driver, moved with a lumbering grace that bespoke extensive martial arts training. The men who rotated shifts at the elevator bank wore earpieces and bulged out of their jackets in a way that suggested Kevlar vests and shoulder holsters. Deliveries were not brought to the door. They were intercepted in the lobby, scanned, and brought up by security. The spire was a fortress, and Christine couldn't shake the feeling that the security wasn't just to keep people out, but to keep something or someone in. Adrian was a phantom in his own home. He left before she woke, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood, leather, and something metallic lingering in the hallway as the only proof of his presence. He returned late, often past midnight, his expression carved from granite. Sometimes she would hear him packing in his study, the heavy thud of his footsteps echoing through the floorboards, a caged tiger prowling his territory. He treated her with a distant, terrifying politeness. He asked if she had eaten, if she needed anything, but he never asked how she felt. He looked at her like she was a rare artifact he had acquired, valuable, fragile, and entirely his possession. It was a Tuesday night when the distance between them finally snapped. Christine was in the library, a room she had initially been too afraid to enter. It was a 2-story cavern of dark wood and leather, filled with books that looked like they had been bound in the last century. She was dusting the lower shelves, the rhythmic motion soothing her nerves, when the heavy double doors swung open. Adrian stood there. He had clearly just arrived home. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck, and the top 2 buttons of his shirt were unfastened, revealing the hollow of his throat. He looked exhausted, but it was a wired, dangerous exhaustion. His eyes were dark, dilated, and fixed on her. "I did not know you were in here," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I can leave," Christine said quickly, clutching the feather duster like a shield. "I was just finishing." "Stay," he commanded. He walked to the liquor cabinet built into the bookshelf and poured a generous measure of whiskey. He didn't offer her any. He downed half of it in one swallow and hissed through his teeth as the burn settled. He turned to face her, leaning back against the mahogany shelves. The lamp on the desk cast half his face in shadow, emphasizing the sharp, predatory angle of his jaw. "You are looking better," he observed. "The shadows under your eyes are gone. You have gained weight." "I have been eating," she said, feeling self-conscious under his scrutiny. "The food is plentiful." "Good, I do not like my investments to depreciate." "Is that what I am?" Christine asked, a spark of her old defiance flaring up. "An investment? Like a stock portfolio or a warehouse?" Adrian swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the vortex. "Everything is an investment, Christine. Time, money, loyalty, people. You put something in, you expect a return." "And what return do you expect from me? Cleaning your books?" Adrian pushed off the shelf and walked toward her. He moved with that unnerving silence she had noticed in the alley. He stopped barely a foot away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He smelled of smoke and rain and raw power. "I expect you to survive," he said softly. "That is enough for now." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Christine flinched, instinctively bracing for a blow. Adrian froze. His eyes narrowed, a flash of cold fury passing through them, not at her, she realized, but at whoever had taught her to flinch. He didn't pull away. Instead, he slowly, deliberately tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her neck, his touch electric, scorching. "Do not fear me, Christine," he murmured. "Fear the world outside that door, but never fear me." He held her gaze for a long, suffocating moment, the air between them charged with a tension that felt less like gratitude and more like the pull of gravity before a collision. Then, he stepped back, the mask of the CEO sliding back into place. "I have a gala tomorrow night," he stated, his voice returning to its cool, professional cadence. "The annual charity ball for the City Development Fund. It is a tedious affair filled with vultures pretending to be peacocks." "Okay," Christine said, unsure why he was telling her this. "I require a companion," he continued. "If I go alone, I will be besieged by matchmakers and desperate fathers trying to sell me their daughters to secure a merger. It is distracting. I need a buffer." "You want me to go?" Christine asked, her eyes widening. "Adrian, I don't belong there. I don't have a dress. I don't know how to talk to those people. 3 weeks ago, I was eating out of a dumpster." Adrian smirked, a dry, humorless expression. "You will find that the difference between the people at the gala and the people in the alley is simply the quality of their suits. As for the dress, it has been taken care of." He turned and walked toward the door. "Be ready at 7. Do not make me wait." The dress was a weapon in the form of fabric. It lay in a box on her bed the next afternoon, a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered like oil on water. It was backless, with a neckline that plunged just enough to be daring without being vulgar. Along with it were shoes, strappy silver stilettos that looked impossible to walk in, and a diamond choker that probably cost more than the entire city block she grew up on. When Christine stepped out of the elevator into the foyer at 7 o'clock, Adrian was waiting. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, the black fabric absorbing the light. He was adjusting his cufflinks, but his hands stopped when he saw her. He didn't say a word. His gaze started at her feet and traveled slowly, agonizingly up to her face. It was an appraisal, thorough and possessive. Christine felt her breath hitch in her throat. She felt exposed, yet armored. "Adequate," he finally said, though the darkness in his eyes suggested he was thinking words far more heated than adequate. He stepped forward and offered his arm. "Remember the rules. You stay by my side, you smile, you do not speak unless spoken to, and even then keep it vague. If anyone asks, you are a consultant from overseas." "And what do I consult on?" she whispered as she took his arm, the muscle beneath the suit jacket hard as steel. "Risk management," he replied as the elevator doors opened. The drive to the gala was silent, but the air inside the Rolls-Royce was thick with unsaid words. When they arrived at the venue, a sprawling museum of modern art in the city center, the paparazzi were a wall of flashing lights. Adrian didn't flinch. He guided her through the chaos with a hand firmly on the small of her back, his touch branding her through the silk. Inside, the gala was a sea of excess. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars hung from the ceiling. Waiters in white gloves moved like synchronized swimmers with trays of champagne. The room was filled with the city's elite, politicians, tech moguls, heiresses. But the moment Adrian stepped into the room, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations lulled. Heads turned. A pathway opened up in the crowd, people stepping aside with a mixture of reverence and fear. Christine realized then that Adrian wasn't just wealthy, he was something else entirely. He was a predator walking among livestock. He moved through the room with shark-like efficiency, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries that sounded like threats, and accepting compliments with bored indifference. Christine stayed glued to his side, her hand clutching his forearm. "Adrian," a booming voice called out. A heavy-set man with a red face and a cigar-stained smile approached them. He was sweating, despite the cool air conditioning. "Councilman Miller," Adrian said smoothly, though his grip on Christine's arm tightened imperceptibly. "I was wondering when you would surface." "Just wanted to say hello, Adrian. Splendid evening, isn't it? And who is this lovely creature?" "Christine," Adrian said, offering no surname, no explanation. "Charmed, I'm sure," Miller said, his eyes raking over her in a way that made Christine's skin crawl. He looked back at Adrian, his smile faltering slightly. "I heard about the logistical issue at the docks last week. Terrible business. Hope it didn't set you back." Adrian's expression didn't change, but the temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "There was no issue, Miller, just a clerical error. It has been corrected. And the person responsible for the error has been retired." Miller paled, he laughed nervously. "Right, of course. Well, good to see you, Adrian." As the councilman hurried away, Christine looked up at Adrian. What did he mean about the docks? Adrian looked down at her, his eyes cold. "Drink your champagne, Christine. It is vintage." The night wore on, a blur of faces and forced smiles. But Christine noticed things. She noticed the way certain men nodded to Adrian from across the room, men who didn't look like CEOs, men with scars and cold eyes. She noticed the way the security staff at the venue deferred to Adrian's personal guards. She noticed that Adrian wasn't discussing stocks or bonds, he was discussing territories, routes, and leverage. Around midnight, they were cornered by a thin, nervous-looking man near the terrace doors. "Mr. Cross," the man whispered, looking around frantically. I have the payment, but I need more time for the interest. The shipment was seized by customs." Adrian cut him off with a look. "Not here." "Please," the man begged, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Valenti is pressuring me. If I don't pay you, he said he'll offer me protection against you, but his price is." Adrian moved so fast Christine almost missed it. He stepped into the man's personal space, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only the three of them could hear. "If you say that name again, I will have your tongue cut out before you leave this building. You owe me a debt. You will pay it by Friday, or I will take your assets. All of them. Including your house in the Hamptons where your wife and daughters are currently sleeping. Do we understand each other?" The man nodded, terrified tears welling in his eyes. Yes, Mr. Cross." "Go." The man fled. Christine stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cruelty in Adrian's voice hadn't been an act, It had been a promise. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the monster beneath the tuxedo. He wasn't a savior. He was a kingpin. "Let us go," Adrian said abruptly, grabbing her hand. "The air in here is stale." The ride back to the spire was tense. Adrian stared out the window, his jaw clenched, radiating a dark, volatile energy. The encounter with the man and the mention of the name, Valenti, had unsettled him in a way he refused to voice. When they entered the penthouse, Adrian didn't go to his room. He went straight to the wet bar, pouring a drink with a hand that shook slightly with suppressed rage. Christine stood in the middle of the room, her shoes dangling from her hand, the adrenaline of the night crashing into exhaustion. "Who are you?" she asked into the silence. Adrian slammed the glass down on the counter. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "I am the man who keeps you alive," he growled, turning to face her. "That is all you need to know." "It's not enough," Christine shouted back, the frustration boiling over. "You threaten people. You talk about retiring employees. That man was terrified of you. You're not a businessman, Adrian. What are you?" Adrian crossed the room in 3 long strides. He grabbed her upper arms, not painfully, but with enough force to hold her in place. He pulled her close, his face inches from hers. She could see the gold flecks in his dark irises, the raw, unbridled intensity of a man who lived on the edge of violence. "I am a necessary evil," he whispered, his voice rough. "I am the reason the chaos doesn't swallow this city whole. You want to know what I am? I am the monster that keeps the other monsters away." He stared at her, his gaze dropping to her lips. For a second, Christine thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to. The fear was there, yes, but so was a dark, magnetic pull that defied logic. She leaned in, her breath mingling with his. But he stopped. He closed his eyes, a look of pained restraint crossing his face, and released her abruptly. "Go to bed, Christine," he rasped, turning his back on her. "Before I do something that will ruin us both." Christine stood there for a moment, trembling, then turned and ran down the hallway. But she didn't go to her room. Her mind was racing, her curiosity burning like a fever. She needed to know the truth. She needed proof. She waited until she heard the heavy door of Adrian's bedroom click shut. Then, she crept back down the hall. Rule number 1, never enter the office. She pushed the door open. It was unlocked. The room was dark, illuminated only by the city lights filtering through the blinds. She moved to the massive oak desk, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She didn't know what she was looking for, a ledger, a file, anything that would give a name to the darkness she sensed in him. She opened the top drawer. Pens, a notepad, a heavily encrypted hard drive. She opened the second drawer. Her breath caught in her throat. Lying on a bed of black velvet was a gun. It wasn't a sleek, modern pistol like the security guards wore. It was a heavy, custom 1911, the metal dark and worn. Beside it lay a stack of dossiers. The top one was labeled Territory Dispute, VALENTI. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and brushed the cold metal of the gun. It was real. The violence wasn't just implied, it was tangible. Looking closer at the papers underneath, she saw maps of the city with zones marked in red ink. Not zoning for real estate development, but zones of control. Shipping lanes, warehouse districts, drug corridors. He wasn't a CEO, he was a warlord. "Find what you were looking for." The voice came from the doorway, low and lethal. Christine froze. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. She heard the click of the light switch, flooding the room with brightness. She slowly turned to face him. Adrian stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He had removed his jacket and tie, his white shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. He didn't look angry. He looked resigned. I just, Christine stammered, backing up until her hips hit the desk. "I told you," Adrian said, walking slowly into the room. "Rule number 1. He stopped in front of the desk, reaching past her to pick up the gun. He checked the safety with a practiced flick of his thumb, then looked at her. "Now you know," he said quietly. "No more lies, no more CEO and the stray. You see the gun, you see the maps, you know what I am." He placed the gun back in the drawer and closed it with a soft thud. He placed his hands on the desk, caging her in between his arms. "The question is," he whispered, his face close enough that she could see the sorrow hidden deep in his eyes, "are you going to run? Because if you run, Christine, I cannot protect you. And once you leave this room, you are fair game." Christine looked at him. She saw the danger, yes, but she also remembered the way he had stood between her and the thugs in the alley. She remembered the way he had touched her hair in the library. She remembered the way he had looked at the terrified man at the gala, cruel, yes, but protecting a code, a structure. She realized then that the cage wasn't to keep her in. It was to keep the war out. "I'm not running," she whispered, the realization terrifying her more than the gun. Adrian stared at her, a mixture of relief and regret washing over his features. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Then God help you," he murmured, "because you have just walked into the middle of a war zone." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, a benediction and a curse all in one. "Get some sleep, Christine. Tomorrow everything changes." The knowledge of who Adrian Cross truly was did not send Christine fleeing into the night as he had predicted. Instead, it settled over her like a heavy, suffocating coat that she refused to take off. The penthouse at the Spire, once a symbol of sterile luxury, had transformed into something else entirely in her eyes. It was no longer just a high-rise apartment. It was the command center of a shadow empire, a fortress where decisions were made that decided the fate of shipping lanes, illicit cargo, and human lives. Every time Adrian's phone buzzed on the mahogany dining table, Christine didn't see a business deal. She saw the shifting of territories, the silent exchange of power that kept the city's underworld in a stranglehold of order. A week had passed since the night in his office, a week defined by a tense, vibrating silence that stretched between them. Adrian did not hide the truth anymore, nor did he flaunt it. He simply existed in his duality, leaving the gun in the drawer but locking the office when he wasn't there. He watched her with a renewed intensity, his dark eyes tracking her movements across the room, as if waiting for the moment she would break, the moment the reality of his violence would become too much for her conscience to bear. But Christine had lived on the streets. She knew that morality was often a luxury afforded only to those with full bellies and warm beds. Adrian was a monster, perhaps, but he was a monster who had given her a key to the castle. On a Thursday afternoon, the claustrophobia of the glass walls finally became unbearable. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the threat of another storm, and the air conditioning in the penthouse felt artificially stale. Christine found Marcus in the kitchen, casually assembling a sandwich with hands that could snap a man's neck. "I need air," she announced, her voice tight. "I need to walk. Real air, Marcus, not this filtered oxygen." Marcus paused, a slice of turkey hovering in midair. He looked at her, then at his watch. "The boss prefers you stay inside. The Valenti chatter is up." "I am not asking for a trip to the chaotic districts," Christine countered, grabbing her coat. "Just the block, 10 minutes. You can walk behind me and glare at anyone who looks at me sideways. Please, Marcus, I feel like a bird in an aquarium." The large man sighed, the sound rumbling in his chest like a distant subway train. 10 minutes, perimeter only. The wind outside was biting, carrying the metallic scent of ozone and exhaust, but to Christine it smelled like freedom. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, burying her chin in the scarf, and walked briskly down the sidewalk. Marcus trailed 10 feet behind her, a silent, imposing shadow that deterred anyone from getting too close. The city was alive, the rush hour traffic creating a river of red taillights and yellow taxis. For a moment, Christine felt normal again, just another face in the crowd, not the secret keeper of the city's most dangerous man. She stopped at a newsstand on the corner to look at the headlines, her mind wandering. It was a mistake. In her brief lapse of vigilance, she failed to notice the man leaning against the brick facade of the adjacent building, his hood pulled low, a cigarette dangling from his cracked lips. It wasn't until the smell hit her, stale beer, cheap tobacco, and unwashed skin, that the memory violently slammed into the present. Well, if it isn't the princess of the pavement. Christine froze. The voice was a jagged razor across her nerves, a sound that had haunted her nightmares for the last 2 years. She turned slowly, her breath hitching in her throat. "Jax." He looked worse than she remembered, if that was possible. His face was gaunt, the skin clinging tightly to his skull, his eyes feverish and bloodshot. He wore layers of filthy clothes that hung off his skeletal frame, but there was a manic, wiry strength in the way he pushed himself off the wall. Jax was the reason she had ended up on the streets. He was the ex-boyfriend who had drained her bank account for his addictions, who had beaten her until she couldn't stand, and who had eventually sold her out to loan sharks to cover his own debts. "You look good, Chrissy," he sneered, stepping into her personal space. "Real good, expensive coat, clean hair. I saw you getting into that Rolls-Royce the other day. I thought I was hallucinating, but no." Little Chrissy landed herself a wail. "Get away from me," Christine hissed, stepping back. Marcus was already moving, closing the distance with terrifying speed, but Jax was desperate, and desperation made him reckless. He lunged forward, his grime-encrusted hand grabbing Christine's wrist, his grip bruising. "You owe me," he spat, his breath hot and foul against her face. "I took care of you. I protected you. And you run off and play house with some billionaire while I'm out here starving? You're going to give me some cash, Chrissy, right now, or I'm going to start screaming about who you really are. I'm going to tell your new sugar daddy that you're nothing but a—" The sentence was never finished. A hand the size of a shovel clamped onto Jax's shoulder. It wasn't Marcus. The pressure was instantaneous and crushing. Jax gasped, his knees buckling as he was forced downward by the sheer mechanical force of the grip. Christine looked up, her eyes widening in shock. Adrian stood there. He had just stepped out of the black SUV that had silently pulled up to the curb. He was still in his suit from the office, pristine and sharp, a terrifying contrast to the filth of the man he was currently crushing. Adrian's face was devoid of anger. It was a blank, frozen lake of indifference, which was infinitely more terrifying than rage. "Let go of her," Adrian said. The command was spoken at a conversational volume, yet it cut through the noise of the traffic like a blade. Jax whimpered, releasing Christine's wrist as if it were red-hot iron. He tried to twist away, but Adrian's grip was absolute. Marcus stepped up to Christine, positioning himself between her and the threat, effectively shielding her from the scene, but she stepped around him. She needed to see this. "Do you know who I am?" Adrian asked, tilting his head slightly, observing Jax with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a diseased specimen. Jax looked up, pain etching lines into his face. You're the guy from the papers. Cross. Look, man, she's my girl. She owes me money, I was just—" "She is not your girl," Adrian corrected softly, "and she owes you nothing." Adrian signaled with a slight twitch of his finger. 2 more security personnel materialized from the SUV. They didn't look like police, they looked like executioners. They grabbed Jax, hauling him up from the pavement as his feet scrambled uselessly for traction. "Wait, wait," Jax screamed, realization dawning on him that this wasn't a standard altercation. "I didn't touch her, I just wanted to talk. Chrissy, tell him we have history." Adrian looked at Christine. He didn't ask for permission, but he waited for her acknowledgement. The streetlights flickered on above them, casting long, distorted shadows. Christine looked at Jax, the man who had broken her ribs, who had stolen her dignity, who had left her to freeze. She looked at his terrified eyes and felt nothing. The pity she used to have for him had been burned away by the cold nights on the concrete. "He hurt me, Adrian," she whispered, the confession hanging in the damp air. "For years." Adrian's eyes darkened, the pupils dilating until the iris was almost gone. The indifference vanished, replaced by a flash of malevolent, focused intent. He looked back at Jax, and for the first time, he smiled. It was the smile of a devil welcoming a sinner home. "Put him in the trunk," Adrian ordered. "Take him to the warehouse in District 4. I will deal with this personally tonight." "No, no, please," Jax shrieked as he was dragged toward the SUV. The door slammed shut, cutting off his pleas. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles in his jacket. He turned to Christine. He didn't touch her. He seemed to be restraining himself, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Go upstairs," he said, his voice tight. "What are you going to do?" Christine asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I am going to close a loose end," he replied. "Go upstairs, Christine." He got back into the car. As it pulled away, disappearing into the labyrinth of the city, Christine realized she wasn't trembling from fear of him. She was trembling because, for the first time in her life, the monster was on her side. It was 3 a.m. when Adrian returned. Christine was sitting on the rug in front of the fireplace, the embers dying down to a dull, pulsing orange. She hadn't been able to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jax's face, then Adrian's cold smile. She heard the elevator chime and the heavy tread of his footsteps. He walked into the living room. He had changed his clothes, the suit was gone, replaced by a black tactical sweater and dark jeans. He looked weary, a bone-deep exhaustion that slumped his broad shoulders. He went straight to the liquor cabinet, pouring a drink with a hand that was steady, frighteningly so. "Is he dead?" Christine asked from the floor. Adrian paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his face was unreadable, a mask of stone. "He will never hurt you again," he said simply. "He has been persuaded to leave the city, permanently." Christine knew what that meant. In Adrian's world, people didn't just leave. They were erased. She should have been horrified. She should have run to the phone and called the police. But the police had never helped her when Jax was breaking her fingers one by one. The police had told her it was a domestic dispute. Adrian had solved the problem in a single night. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian flinched as if she had thrown boiling water at him. He set the glass down and walked over to where she sat. He lowered himself onto the rug beside her, his long legs stretched out, staring into the dying fire. "Do not thank me for violence, Christine," he murmured. "It stains the soul, and mine is already black enough." "Why do you do it?" she asked, turning to look at his profile. The firelight danced across his sharp features, highlighting the tension in his jaw. "You could just be a CEO, you have the mind for it. Why this? Why the gangs, the territories, the darkness?" Adrian was silent for a long time. He reached up and slowly pulled the collar of his sweater down, exposing his left shoulder and the upper part of his chest. Christine gasped. The skin was a ruin of scar tissue. Jagged, raised white lines crisscrossed his flesh, old burn marks, and knife wounds that looked like a map of pain. It wasn't just a few scars, it was a history of torture. "My father was the king of the city," Adrian said, his voice distant, as if reciting a story from 1,000 years ago. "But he was careless. When I was 15, a rival family, the Valentis, kidnapped me. They wanted his territory. They held me for 3 weeks. Every day they sent him a piece of me or a video of what they were doing. They wanted to break him by breaking me." Christine reached out, her fingers hovering over the scars but not daring to touch. "Oh God, Adrian." "He didn't break," Adrian continued. "He burned their world to the ground to get me back. But by the time he found me, I had learned a lesson that no business school can teach. I learned that power without the will to use violence is just vanity. If you want to protect what is yours, you have to be willing to be the thing that nightmares are made of." He pulled his collar back up, hiding the damage. "When he died, I took the throne. Not because I wanted the power, but because I knew what would happen if the vacuum was left unfilled. The city would tear itself apart. Innocents like you would be caught in the crossfire. I became the monster to keep the other monsters on a leash." He turned his head to look at her, his dark eyes filled with a vulnerability that shattered her heart. "I am not a good man, Christine. I am a necessary evil. And today I enjoyed hurting him because he touched you. That scares me more than any enemy I have ever faced." Christine moved before she could think. She shifted on her knees and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down. Adrian stiffened for a second, his muscles rigid with surprise, before he collapsed into her embrace. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his arms coming around her waist, holding her with a desperation that bordered on pain. "You saved me," she whispered into his hair, smelling the soap and the faint, metallic scent of the night. "You aren't evil, Adrian. You are damaged. We both are." "I should send you away," he groaned, his voice muffled against her skin. "I should put you on a plane to somewhere safe, where the name cross means nothing." "But you won't," Christine said, pulling back to look him in the eye. Adrian looked at her, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The air between them crackled, charged with the electricity of shared trauma and undeniable attraction. "No," he admitted, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I won't. I am too selfish. I want you here. I want you in my house. I want you in my bed. I want you to be the one thing in this world that is purely mine, untouched by the filth I wade through every day." "That is a dangerous want, Adrian." "I know," he whispered, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "But for the first time in 20 years, I am terrified of losing something." The kiss, when it came, was not gentle. It was a collision of two broken souls trying to fuse together. It was desperate, hungry, and tasted of whiskey and tears. Adrian kissed her like he was drowning, and she was the only air left in the universe. Christine met his intensity, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him to her. In that moment, on the floor of the penthouse high above the sleeping city, the line between protector and lover dissolved completely. Christine knew she was making a pact with the devil, but as Adrian's hands moved over her, possessive and reverent, she realized she didn't care about heaven anymore. She would rule hell by his side if it meant she never had to be cold again. But outside the glass walls, the city was waking up. And in the shadows of the harbor, the Valenti family was regrouping, sensing a weakness in the armor of the man who had been untouchable for so long. They didn't know her name yet, but they knew she existed. And in Adrian's world, love was not a shield, it was a target. The morning light that filtered into the master bedroom of the spire was gray and diffuse, hidden behind the eternal veil of the city's smog. Christine Perry woke slowly, her body heavy with a languid, unfamiliar warmth. The space beside her in the massive bed was empty, the sheets cold to the touch, but the indentation of Adrian's head on the pillow remained. She reached out, tracing the fabric, the scent of sandalwood and musk clinging to the linen. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to pretend that this was a normal life, that the man who had held her with such desperate possession the night before was simply a CEO with an early meeting, and not a warlord inspecting the battlements of his empire. She rose, wrapping the silk sheet around her like a toga, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city sprawled below, a grid of iron and concrete that looked peaceful from this height. But Christine knew better now. She knew that beneath the polished veneer of skyscrapers and traffic lights, blood was being spilled to maintain the equilibrium. And she was sleeping with the man holding the knife. She found Adrian in the kitchen. He was fully dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, his posture rigid as he stood by the granite island. A cup of coffee sat untouched near his hand. He was not looking at a tablet or a file this morning. He was staring at a point on the wall, his expression one of terrifying, calculated stillness. Marcus stood by the refrigerator, his usual stoicism replaced by a grim tension. His arms were crossed over his massive chest, and he was watching Adrian with the wariness of a handler watching a tiger that had just smelled blood. "Something is wrong," Christine said. It wasn't a question. Adrian turned his head slowly. The softness she had seen in his eyes the previous night, the vulnerability of the boy who had been broken, was gone. In its place was the icy resolve of Adrian Cross, the king of the city. "Go get dressed, Christine," he said, his voice flat. "Pack a bag." "Why?" Christine tightened her grip on the sheet, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "What happened?" "North Point is gone," Marcus rumbled, answering when Adrian did not. "North Point," Christine repeated, "the distribution center." "Arson," Adrian corrected, "professional, calculated. They bypassed the suppression systems and used military-grade accelerants. 3 of my men are in the burn unit, 2 more are dead." Christine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God." "It was a message," Adrian continued, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more chilling. "The Valenti family is not interested in a territory dispute anymore. They are declaring total war, and they are doing it because they smell weakness." He walked over to her, stopping a foot away. He didn't touch her. He looked at her as if he were memorizing her face for a long journey. "Marcus will take you to the airfield. The jet is fueled. I have a safe house in the Swiss Alps. It is off the grid. You will be safe there until I resolve this." "No," Christine said. The word was quiet, but it hit the room like a stone dropped in a pond. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "This is not a request, Christine. This is a command. You are a liability here." "Is that what I am? A liability, last night?" "Last night was a mistake," Adrian cut her off, his voice rising slightly. "A selfish, dangerous mistake. I let my guard down, and while I was playing house, my men were burning." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, disrupting the perfect grooming. It was the first sign of genuine distress she had seen in him since the night of the gala. "They know, Christine," he whispered, his back to her. "The streets talk. Jax talked before he disappeared. The Valentis know I have taken someone in. They struck North Point to draw me out, but their real target is the soft underbelly. They will come for you to get to me." "Then let them come," Christine said, stepping forward. Adrian spun around, his face contorted with anger. "Do you not understand? This is not a game. This is not surviving on the streets with a shard of glass in your pocket. These people skin their enemies alive. They will not just kill you, they will break you into pieces and mail you to me one by one just to watch me scream. I will not allow that." "I am not going to Switzerland, Adrian," Christine shouted back, the defiance that had kept her alive for 20 years flaring hot and bright. "I spent my whole life running from foster homes, running from Jax, running from the cold. I am done running. You saved me. You brought me into this world. You don't get to ship me off like a package just because it gets difficult." "It is not getting difficult," Adrian roared, slamming his hand onto the granite counter. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "It is getting lethal." "Then teach me," Christine challenged, closing the distance between them until she was chest to chest with him, ignoring the fear that his anger usually instilled. "Don't hide me. Don't treat me like a porcelain doll. If I am the queen of this empire, then teach me how to rule it. Or was all that talk about partnership just a lie to get me into your bed?" Adrian stared at her, his chest heaving. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He looked at the fire in her eyes, the set of her jaw, and he saw the reflection of his own stubborn survivalism. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the back of her neck, pulling her forehead to his. "You are a fool," he breathed, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "A brave, beautiful fool." "If I leave, they win," Christine whispered. "If I run, they know you're scared. If I stay, we fight." Adrian closed his eyes, a shudder running through his massive frame. He was a man who controlled everything, shipping lanes, politicians, the flow of money, but he could not control her. And he realized with a mixture of terror and awe that he didn't want to. "Get dressed," he said, releasing her. "Wear something practical. If you are staying, you are going to see exactly what you are signing up for." The drive to North Point was conducted in a silence that felt heavier than the lead-line doors of the armored SUV. Rain lashed against the bulletproof glass, blurring the world outside into gray streaks. Adrian sat with a tablet on his lap, reviewing security footage, his face illuminated by the pale blue light. He was compartmentalizing, locking away the lover and bringing forward the general. When they arrived at the industrial district, the smell hit them before the car even stopped. It was a vile, acrid stench, burning rubber, melting plastic, and the sickeningly sweet odor of charred meat. The warehouse, once a bastion of Adrian's logistics empire, was a skeletal ruin of twisted steel and smoking concrete. Fire crews were dampening the hotspots, steam rising in thick, choking pillars. Adrian stepped out of the car, unfurling an umbrella. He didn't wait for Marcus. He walked toward the yellow police tape, his stride long and purposeful. Christine followed, flanked closely by Marcus and 2 other guards. A police captain approached them. He looked tired and nervous. "Mr. Cross," the captain said, tipping his hat, "we have the perimeter secured. The official report will say it was an electrical fault." "Casualties?" Adrian asked, looking past the captain at the blackened shell of the building. "2 confirmed, 3 critical. We found the source of ignition in the central office. They used thermite." Adrian nodded slowly, and the cameras. "Wiped, but they left something." The captain signaled to a forensic officer who brought over a clear evidence bag. Inside was a charred, partially melted object. It was a chess piece, the White Queen. It had been driven into the drywall of the foreman's office with a combat knife. Adrian stared at the object, his face betraying nothing, but Christine saw the muscle in his jaw feather. The message was surgical in its precision. In chess, the queen is the most powerful piece, but if you take her, the king is vulnerable. "They know," Adrian said softly. He turned to Christine. The rain drummed against the black umbrella, creating a private sphere of sound amidst the chaos. "Look at this," he commanded, gesturing to the ruins. "Look at the body bags being loaded into the ambulance over there. This is the price, Christine. It is not just danger, it is death. It is the smell of your friends burning. Are you sure you can stomach this?" Christine looked. She forced herself not to look away from the black body bags. She forced herself to inhale the toxic air. It was horrific. It was a nightmare. But then she looked at Adrian. She saw the isolation in his posture, the crushing weight of the crown he wore. If she left, he would become truly monstrous. He would have nothing left to lose. "I am sure," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. Adrian nodded once. "Then let us go, we have work to do." Back at the spire, the atmosphere had shifted from defensive to offensive. The penthouse was transformed into a war room. The dining table was covered in blueprints, maps of the city, and dossiers on the Valenti hierarchy. Adrian's lieutenants had arrived, men and women with hard eyes and expensive suits, who looked at Christine with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Adrian did not send her to her room. He placed a chair for her at his right hand. "This is Christine," he announced to the room. "She speaks for me. If anything happens to me, you take your orders from her until the chain of command is re-established." A ripple of shock went through the room. A bald man with a scar running through his eyebrow leaned forward. "With all due respect, boss," the man said, his voice gravelly. "She is a civilian. We are at war with the Valentis. This isn't a board meeting, it's a blood feud." "She is not a civilian," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "She is the reason we are going to win. The Valentis think I am distracted. They think I am weak because I have let someone in. They are going to learn that I am not weak. I am motivated." He pointed to the map. "The Valentis operate out of the harbor district. They move their narcotics through the shipping containers at Terminal 4. Tonight, we are going to hit Terminal 4, not to burn it, to seize it." "We don't have the manpower for a frontal assault," the scarred lieutenant argued. "Their soldiers are dug in." "We are not going to use manpower," Christine said. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she remembered Adrian's words, "Teach me." She looked at the map. She knew the harbor. She had slept in those shipping containers when the shelters were full. She knew the rats, the tunnels, the forgotten drainage pipes that the city engineers had ignored for decades. "They guard the gates and the docks," Christine said, her voice gaining strength. "But the drainage system from the old cannery runs right underneath Terminal 4. The grates are rusted through. I used to use them to get out of the wind. A team could move underneath their feet and come up inside the compound without tripping a single perimeter alarm." The lieutenant looked at the map, then at Adrian. "Is that true?" Adrian looked at Christine, a flicker of pride igniting in his dark eyes. "Pull the municipal schematics for the drainage system," Adrian ordered. "If she says it is there, it is there." The mood in the room shifted. Christine wasn't just the boss's girlfriend anymore, she was an asset. She had knowledge that their expensive surveillance couldn't buy. As the meeting dispersed and the lieutenants moved to mobilize their teams, Adrian remained at the table, staring at the map. Christine stood up, her legs trembling from the adrenaline. "You did well," Adrian said quietly. "I just told the truth," she replied. Adrian stood and walked around the table. He took her hands in his. They were cold. "You understand what this means?" he asked. "By planning this attack, you are no longer an observer. You are a participant. If the law ever comes for us, you are an accomplice. If the Valentis find you, you are a combatant. You have crossed the line, Christine. There is no going back to innocence." "I lost my innocence a long time ago, Adrian," she said, squeezing his hands. "I would rather be guilty and alive with you than innocent and dead in the alley." Adrian pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. The embrace was fierce, desperate. "I promise you," he vowed, his voice vibrating against her chest. "I will burn this city to ash before I let them touch you. I will build a fortress so high that no one can ever reach you again." But promises in the underworld were fragile things, made of glass and blood. The elevator chimed. Marcus stepped out, his face pale, a shade Christine had never seen on the giant man. He held a tablet in his hand. "Boss," he said, his voice straining, "you need to see this." Adrian released Christine, his body instantly tensing. He took the tablet. Christine watched his face. She saw the color drain from his skin. She saw the mask crack. "What is it?" she asked, stepping forward. Adrian didn't answer. He turned the tablet so she could see. It was a live video feed. It showed the interior of a room, a small, windowless concrete cell. In the center of the room, tied to a chair, was a woman. She was older, her hair gray and disheveled, her face bruised. She looked terrified. Christine let out a strangled cry. Mom. It was her mother. The woman who had abandoned her 10 years ago, the woman Christine hadn't seen since she was a teenager. The woman who lived in a trailer park 3 states away. A voice came over the video feed, distorted and metallic. We couldn't get to the queen, the voice sneered, so we took the pawn. You have 24 hours, Cross. Surrender the spire and the shipping routes, or the girl watches her mother die. The screen went black. Christine stood frozen, the world tilting on its axis. They had reached out across the country. They had dug into a past she thought was buried. Adrian dropped the tablet on the table. The screen shattered. He walked to the window, staring out at the city that suddenly looked like a graveyard. They made a mistake, he whispered, his voice sounding like the grinding of tectonic plates. Christine looked at him, tears streaming down her face. What are we going to do? Adrian turned. His eyes were not human. They were 2 black holes, void of mercy, void of humanity. They think they have leverage, he said. They think they can bargain, but they forgot one thing. He walked to the wall safe hidden behind a painting and spun the dial. He pulled out the heavy 1911 and a second, smaller gun, a sleek, compact pistol. He walked over to Christine and pressed the smaller gun into her hand. It was heavy, cold, and terrified her. They forgot that I don't negotiate with terrorists, Adrian said, and they forgot that you are not just a weakness. He gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging in. We are not going to surrender the spire. We are going to kill them all, every last one of them. And for the first time, looking at the gun in her hand, Christine realized that the price of the promise was not her safety. The price was her soul, and she was about to pay it. The tactical vest felt heavy and foreign against Christine Perry's chest, a rigid carapace designed to stop bullets, but incapable of stopping the terror that fluttered like a trapped bird in her throat. She sat in the back of the armored SUV, the silence of the cabin amplified by the drumming of rain against the reinforced roof. Beside her, Adrian Cross was checking the magazine of his sidearm. The movement was rhythmic, mechanical, and terrifyingly calm. He was no longer the man who had held her in the library or the lover who had whispered promises against her skin. He was an instrument of war, sharpened by decades of violence and honed for this specific night. They were parked 2 blocks away from Terminal 4, hidden in the shadow of a derelict overpass. The city outside was asleep, unaware that a shift in its tectonic plates was about to occur. To the public, tomorrow would just be another day of headlines about gang violence or corporate mergers. To the people in this car, tonight was the end of the world as they knew it. Adrian slid the magazine home with a metallic click that sounded final. He looked at her, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He reached out and touched the side of her face, his gloved thumb brushing her cheekbone. You do not have to go in, he said, the offer hanging between them like smoke. Marcus can take you to the extraction point. I can do this alone. Christine shook her head. The fear was there, yes, but beneath it was a foundation of steel she hadn't known existed until he unearthed it. They have my mother, Adrian, and they have you. If I stay in the car, I am just waiting to hear which one of you dies. I am done waiting. Adrian held her gaze for a long moment, searching for any fracture in her resolve. Finding none, he nodded. Stay behind me. If the shooting starts, you drop to the ground. You do not move until I say the word clear. And if anyone other than me or Marcus comes through a door, you use the gun. I know, she whispered, gripping the cold steel of the pistol he had given her. He signaled to the driver. The doors unlocked with a heavy thud. Let us end this. The entrance to the drainage tunnels was a rusted maw in the side of a concrete embankment, half obscured by overgrown weeds and piles of trash. To the Valenti sentries patrolling the perimeter of the shipping yard above, it was just another piece of urban decay. To Christine, it was a memory. She had slept in this tunnel 3 years ago during a blizzard, huddled under newspapers while the rats scurried in the darkness. She led the way. Marcus took point with a suppressed assault rifle, his massive frame hunched to fit in the cramped cylindrical space. Adrian was directly behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a silent tether keeping them connected in the suffocating dark. The tunnel smelled of rot, sea salt, and old sewage. The water was ankle-deep, freezing sludge that soaked through Christine's boots, but she didn't slow down. She knew the rhythm of the pipes. She knew where the ground dropped away and where the rusted rebar poked through the concrete like skeletal fingers. 50 yards, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the dripping water. There is a maintenance hatch. It comes up inside the old cannery boiler room. They welded it shut years ago, but the hinges are rusted through. Marcus moved forward, testing the hatch above them. He braced his shoulder against the iron and pushed. With a groan of corroded metal that sounded deafening in the silence, the hatch gave way. They climbed up into the boiler room. It was warm, humming with the vibration of the generators the Valenties used to power their illicit operations. The air tasted of diesel and dust. Adrian moved instantly, clearing the room with the efficiency of a predator. He signaled for silence. Through the thick metal door, they could hear voices. Laughter, the clinking of bottles. "They are relaxed," Adrian murmured near her ear. "They think they are the hunters." He tapped his earpiece. Team B, initiate distraction. Seconds later, a massive explosion rocked the ground. The sound was distant but powerful, the front gates of the terminal being breached by Adrian's diversionary force. Shouts erupted from the other side of the door. Footsteps thundered past as the Valentine soldiers rushed toward the main gate, drawn away from the heart of the compound like moths to a flame. Adrian looked at Marcus. Now. Marcus kicked the door open. They moved into the hallway, a blurred phalanx of motion. 2 stragglers were sprinting down the corridor, weapons in hand. They never saw Adrian coming. 2 suppressed shots coughed into the silence, and the men dropped before their bodies even registered death. They moved deeper into the complex, navigating the labyrinth of corridors that Christine had once memorized from the outside looking in. They reached the central administrative office, the nerve center of the Valentine operation. Adrian held up a fist. He pointed to the door. Inside, he mouthed. He didn't need to say more. Christine felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her mother was in there, and so was Silvio Valentine. Adrian placed a breaching charge on the lock. He looked at Christine one last time, his eyes conveying a promise. "I will not let you fall." He detonated the charge. The door blew inward in a shower of sparks and wood splinters. Adrian and Marcus surged into the room, weapons raised. Christine followed, her pistol shaking in her grip, stepping into the nightmare. The room was a chaos of overturned desks and dim lighting. In the center, tied to a chair, was her mother. She looked older, smaller, her face pale with terror. Standing behind her, using her body as a shield, was a man in a white suit that was now dusted with debris. Silvio Valentine. He held a gun to her mother's temple. His eyes were wide, manic, the look of a man who realized too late that he had kicked a hornet's nest. "Stop," Valentine screamed, pressing the barrel harder against the woman's skin. "One more step and I paint the wall with her brains." Adrian froze. His gun was leveled at Valentine's head, but the angle was impossible. The mother was sobbing, a broken, low sound that tore at Christine's heart. "You lost, Silvio," Adrian said, his voice terrifyingly conversational. "My men have the perimeter. Your soldiers are dead or dying at the gate. Put the gun down, and I will make it quick." Valentine laughed, a high, jagged sound. "Quick. There is no quick way out of this, Cross. You think you can just walk in here and take my city." "It was never your city," Adrian corrected. "You were just renting space." Valentine's eyes darted to Christine. She stood near the doorway, partly obscured by Marcus. A sneer curled his lip. "And this is the little stray," he spat. "The one you threw it all away for. She doesn't look like much, Adrian. A gutter rat in a tactical vest. Does she know you're a monster? Does she know how many men you buried to buy those suits you wear?" "She knows," Adrian said softly. Valentine shifted, trying to get a better angle on Adrian, momentarily exposing a fraction of his shoulder. It was a mistake born of arrogance. Christine didn't think, she didn't calculate, she simply reacted. The training Adrian had given her, not with guns but with observation, kicked in. She saw the opening. She raised her pistol. Her hands stopped shaking. She wasn't aiming to kill. She was aiming to disrupt. She fired. The bullet struck Valentine in the upper shoulder. He howled, the shock causing his arm to jerk reflexively away from her mother's head. That split second was all Adrian needed. A single shot rang out from Adrian's weapon. It was thunderous, final. Valentine dropped like a marionette with its strings cut. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and absolute. Adrian didn't check the body. He knew his aim. He holstered his weapon and walked to the chair, pulling a knife to slice the ropes binding Christine's mother. The woman fell forward into his arms, sobbing hysterically. Christine stood by the door, the gun still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. She stared at the man on the floor. She had just shot someone. She had just engaged in violence. And God help her, she didn't feel guilty. She felt relief. Adrian handed the weeping woman to Marcus. Get her to the medical team, then get her to the safe house. Marcus nodded, gently scooping the woman up. He paused as he passed Christine. Nice shot, kid, he rumbled. As the room cleared, leaving only the two of them and the corpse of their enemy, Adrian walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He took the gun from her hand, engaged the safety, and placed it on a desk. Then he took her face in his hands. His eyes scanned hers, looking for trauma, looking for the break. Are you okay? He asked, his voice raw. Christine looked at her hands. They were steady. She looked at him. She saw the blood on his tactical gear, the darkness in his eyes, but she also saw the fierce, consuming love that fueled it. I am okay, she whispered. Is it over? Adrian looked down at Valentine's body, then back at her. The war is over, he said, but the work is just beginning. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against the hard ceramic of his vest. Christine buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of smoke and rain. They stood there in the ruins of their enemy's kingdom, two broken pieces that had fit together to form something unbreakable. 6 months later, the gala was held in the newly constructed Cross Foundation wing of the City Museum. The architecture was sweeping and modern, all glass and steel, soaring upward like a cathedral to progress. The city's elite were there to enforce the politicians, the investors, the socialites. They drank champagne and discussed the revitalization of the harbor district, praising the mysterious influx of capital that had turned the crime-ridden docks into a thriving trade hub. Christine Perry stood on the balcony overlooking the main hall. She wore a gown of silver silk that draped over her body like liquid moonlight. Her hair was pinned up, revealing the diamond necklace that rested against her throat. She looked every inch the queen of this court. But her eyes were still sharp. She watched the room not with the vacuous gaze of a socialite, but with the assessing stare of a strategist. She noted who was talking to whom, which council members were drinking too much, and which security guards were slightly out of position. A shadow detached itself from the crowd and moved to join her on the balcony. Adrian Cross came to stand beside her. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, but the tension that used to coil constantly in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a confident, settled power. You are brooding, he noted, handing her a glass of sparkling water. I am observing, she corrected, taking the glass. Councilman Miller is sweating again. I think he is going to ask for another donation. Let him ask, Adrian said dismissively. We own him, he just doesn't know it yet. He turned to lean against the railing, looking at her. The lights of the city reflected in his dark eyes. Your mother called, he said quietly. She likes the house in Florida. She asked about you. Christine looked out at the skyline. She felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant like a faded bruise. Tell her I am busy. Maybe I will visit in the spring. Adrian nodded, accepting her boundary. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the ring finger. A massive diamond sat there, heavy and flawless. Do you regret it? He asked suddenly. Regret what? Any of it, the night in the alley, the gun, the blood. You could have had a normal life, Christine. Christine laughed softly. She turned to face him, resting her hand on the lapel of his jacket, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath the silk. A normal life? You mean freezing under a bridge, or working a dead-end job afraid of my own shadow? She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was a slow, deliberate kiss, full of possession and promise. I don't want a normal life, Adrian. I want this. I want the spire. I want the power, and I want you. Adrian smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, softening the sharp angles of his face. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Then you have it all, he promised. He turned them back toward the party, toward the world they had conquered. Shall we go inside, Mrs. Cross? The wolves are waiting. Christine smiled. a dangerous, beautiful expression that mirrored his own. Let them wait, I'm not done looking at my city. They stood together on the precipice of their empire, no longer the savior and the stray, but the king and queen of a world they had forged in fire. The darkness was still there, lurking in the corners of the streets below, but it didn't matter anymore. They were the darkness, and together they were untouchable.